Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Rumi Forum. Tonight, we're here with Eileen Gale Ku, and she will be speaking on her new book, Innovative Voices in Education, Engaging Diverse Communities. Eileen Gale Ku is a global speaker and consultant on the unique benefits that diversity brings to schools, communities, and work sites, and strategies to strengthen them. She is author of the award-winning Debunking the Middle Class Myth, Why Diverse Schools Are Good for All Kids, and executive editor of the new Innovative Voices in Education, Engaging Diverse Communities. Eileen's articles and commentaries appear in wide-ranging publications, including USA Today and The Washington Post, Educational Leadership, and Education Week. Eileen's work is informed by her continuing on-the-ground involvement, including an active volunteer life, her family's volunteer commitment at a South African school, including creating a 23,000 book library, was featured in The Washington Post and on Voice of America. Please welcome Eileen Gale Ku.
Thank you, Jenna. Well, I want to say what an honor it is for me to be here. I appreciate so much the invitation to speak here at the Rumi Forum, to be at a place where your mission is interfaith dialogue and intercultural understanding, and a place that truly recognizes that we need to be learning from one another, that we need to value the other, that we need to understand the other, and that we need to learn from the other. And that's the foundation of my work. So it is a true honor to be here, to be able to talk about these issues with you all here today. The theme of the discussion is breaking out of your comfort zone. And we all have a comfort zone. We're all happiest, if you will. We're all comfortable when we're surrounded by people that are like us. It's a very natural thing. And some people say, well, water seeks its own level. You're always going to be with people that are like you, and there's not much you're going to be able to do about that. And I think to some extent that's true, that we don't want to always be, if you will, the other in every environment. We want to be with people who are comforting to us and are comfortable. So it extends to what faith community we choose. Even within a religion, which church do we go to? Which mosque? Which synagogue do we choose? And who are the people within that we become friendly with? It goes to the people that had a similar experience growing up to what we had. You will see here in the Washington area, there's a vibrant group of Texans that get together all the time because there's something they have that they can relate to. So on a lot of levels, we do seek people who make us feel comfortable. It grounds us. It's a good thing. Here's the danger. If those are the only people that you ever see, if those are the only people that you communicate with, then you really don't have an opportunity to go beyond your own limited view of the world. And each one of us has a limited view of the world. To some extent, it becomes like a house of mirrors. Everything is reflected back to you. It all looks really nice because you're just being reflected back to yourself. But when you try to get out of it, you're not really sure where the entrance and where the exit is. And there's no light coming in. It's all just reflection back to you. So that becomes a very limiting thing. And here's what happens when we don't get out of that. We tend to think that everything we do and say and think is the only right way to do it. Why shouldn't it be? Everybody around us is telling us that. They are confirming that what I think is the right way to think. And so when someone new moves into the neighborhood, who's right and who's wrong? The mirrors are all telling me I'm right, so that person has to be wrong. What they're doing, if it doesn't conform to the way I believe things need to be done, it has to be wrong, because that's what I'm being told by the people that I surround myself with. And it's magnified today because you choose your own news. You can be so selective in what you read. You can only subscribe to listservs and news services that tell you exactly what you want to hear. And so you continue this cycle of believing that this is it, this is the way to think. What have we done as a society to try to break out of it? Well, the first way we tried to deal with that is to say, we are diverse, let's celebrate our diversity. Let's have a good time. Well, what if in an attempt to celebrate the diversity, it doesn't make you happy? So the new Middle Eastern restaurant comes in down the street. You don't like Middle Eastern food. You don't even like the smells that come out of there. Those spices kind of make you a little bit sick. You're not celebrating anything. And again, you withdraw back into what really feels comfortable because there's no celebration in that for you. A lot of places, schools, for example, start with international dinners. And it is a nice way to start. And when I was at a very diverse high school as a parent leader, we started having international dinners. And the first time we did it, we got a really great mixed crowd of people from all different backgrounds. And as it moved farther and farther away, the people that were born in this area, that were born near the school, stopped coming to the international dinner because they felt like it wasn't for them. The celebrating diversity wasn't really bringing everybody together. And it was a very superficial level of what diversity means. What we need to do as a society is get real about diversity and recognize the true benefits that diversity brings. The benefits are all around us if we want to look at it. It is the opportunity to get a different perspective, to learn from people who are different, to find different ways to solve a problem, to grow as an individual. Will you always be celebrating? No. As a matter of fact, if you really want to grow, sometimes it's going to be a little uncomfortable. And we have to get to the point where we recognize that a little discomfort is okay. There's a lot that's said about this generation of parents being overprotective of their children, protecting them against anything that made them uncomfortable, that caused them pain. And so they grow up and they're not too resilient, some of them. So we need to get beyond that feeling that everything we do has to make us happy, and everything we do has to make us comfortable, because we don't grow, we don't become resilient, we don't become solid problem solvers. And how do we go about doing that? Well, again, it begins with something that's not so much fun. And that is, instead of looking outward at them and those people and those kids in schools and those families, we look inward. It starts with this introspection of, who am I and why do I think this way? And what you start to see is every one of us has an individual culture that's very complex. Another myth that goes on around our society is that only some people have culture. The Latino family that moved in, they have culture. The people that run the Lebanese restaurant now, there's a culture for you. Or the Indian woman in her beautiful dress. Well, she has a culture, but me, no. I grew up here and I'm a second or third generation and I'm Caucasian, so I don't have a culture. Every one of us has a culture, and that culture is the prism through which we see the world. And another myth about culture is it's just your race, it's just your ethnicity. It is those things, it's very much those things, but it is far more complex than that. It is your race, it is the ethnic group that your family came from, it is where you grew up. Yet maybe you grew up in another country. What part of that country? You had the ambassador from South Africa here, and he was just such a wonderful speaker and so inspiring in a lot of ways. And I've done a lot of volunteer work in South Africa, as you mentioned. And I think of that country. If you just say someone's from South Africa, well, what does that mean? I mean, there are so many different life experiences that people from South Africa have had, and different generations have had very different life experiences, and people from different parts of the country. So to just say, oh, that person is South African, what does that mean? So again, we have to look at what country we grew up in. Let's say you grew up in the United States. What part of the United States? I grew up in New Jersey. If you want to know what New Jerseyans are like, watch Chris Christie on TV. He is the quintessential New Jerseyan. He is direct, and he will do anything for you, and he is very honest, and he's in your face, and to a lot of people he's pushy, maybe not even polite. But that's that. If you grew up in that part of the world, if you grew up in New Jersey or New York, that's the way people speak there. Now, I came from there and I moved to Virginia. Culture shock. And suddenly I'm part of the South, and being part of the North, I was told things about the South. My mother never quite got over the fact that I lived south of the Mason-Dixon line. There's a little bit of Southern hospitality. There's a little bit of slowing down, and I kind of slowed down my New Jersey parlance, and I feel like I got a foot in both worlds. All of that goes into the individual culture of how we view the world. What neighborhood did you grow up in? You can say you come from St. Louis. What part of St. Louis? There are sections that have very different, where you will have a completely different cultural experience than other sections. What's your family like? I did a workshop on generations, and a young woman came up to me and said, I realized that part of why I'm not always feeling comfortable with my peers is I was raised by my grandparents. And I got the values of that generation. And it's very different for me, but they don't really get that until they get to know me a little bit more. So all of these go into making up your individual culture. How do you view the world? What are all the factors that go into it? And we may think we understand someone's individual culture just by looking at them. Those assumptions are really what get us in trouble. Really what get us in trouble. If you looked at me, you would have no idea that my mother did not speak English until she went to kindergarten, and that my grandparents, who I was very close with, were immigrants. How does that piece of my individual culture influence my work? I was never taught the language of my mother and my grandmother, which was Yiddish, because that generation believed you didn't transmit that to your kids. You wanted them to be real Americans. You didn't teach them that stuff. So you didn't teach them that. So here I had a chance to be bilingual, and I never was. So how does that impact the way that I view families that want to preserve their home language? I am very supportive of that. I'm the first one out there with the research that shows that children need to be fluent in their own home language first, and it helps them become fluent in English. And I'm so passionate about it because of a piece of my personal culture. So we need to take a step back and look at, what do we bring into the room? For teachers, it is critical that they do this. Otherwise, they just view kids through their own prism and have no idea what damage they may be doing by making assumptions about kids, by making assumptions about what's right or what's wrong. So I'm going to ask you all, when you think about somebody being respectful to you in a conversation, what would that look like? What's something you expect of a person who's being respectful to you in a conversation? Just call out something. What would they do if they were talking to you respectfully? Yeah.
Listening attentively.
What does that mean?
Listening attentively instead of, because sometimes people sort of pretend to be listening, and then you ask them a question, they have no idea what you just said.
If someone listens attentively, I'm trying to sort of boil that down. And to you, what does that mean? That they can repeat back what you've said?
Yeah, that they're respecting the fact that you're trying to convey something.
Okay.
They're open to listening to it.
So you're open to listening, so they let you finish what you have to say?
Yeah.
Did anyone grow up in a home where no one let anybody finish the sentences? I sure did. In the culture that I grew up in, and again, you sort of look at the Chris Christies of the world, people, if you are engaged in a conversation, you're finishing someone's sentence. If you don't finish their sentence, they don't think you're listening. That's, you know, as you just said, they're letting me finish. No. In my family and a lot of my neighbors, you had to finish their sentence. And if you, again, didn't jump in, you never got to say anything. So Deborah Tannen, who's done a lot of work on communications, actually has a name for this. She calls it overlapping communications. And she says, to some people it's irritating, and to other people it's a welcome way to communicate. So what do you bring into the room with that? Others who have a view of what it looks like to speak, to have a conversation with someone where they're respectful.
Making eye contact.
Making eye contact, which is always one of the first things that people say. And it is so deeply steeped in culture, particularly for many immigrants who come to the United States, where they were taught by their parents to look down. I had a principal tell me from the Atlanta region that as more Latino families were moving in, she had an exchange with a student, and this kid was acting out a little bit, and he was just looking down, and she said, "You look at me when I'm talking to you." And he started to cry. And it wasn't until months later that she suddenly realized she was the one who was being totally insensitive. She just didn't understand that her cultural rule was not his cultural rule. And those are the dangers of our not breaking down what our expectations are for other people, and we start labeling them as brash or too slow or not listening or pushy. And again, when you've got in work environments, we start labeling somebody as too old. Well, they really can't be engaged because they just don't understand how things are going anymore, or they're too young. What do they know? They haven't waited their turn. I heard a diversity trainer say this at a conference. You know, in my business, I've been here 25 years. I don't want those young people telling me they know what's going on ahead of me. When they've put in 10 years, they can talk. She literally said that. How do we shut people out because they don't look right, because they're not from the right generation, because they have an accent, and we don't think they truly understand what it is we're trying to get across? All the ways that we shut people out and we lose the valuable lessons that they have to share with us. And I'm going to share one story with you, and then Jen and I will talk a little bit. But I have learned so much from our volunteer work in South Africa. My husband and I work on this. We go there and to a rural school there. We're working on improving literacy. And I work with families while we're there. And we've been doing this for 5 years now. And I was working with the families on the issue of the dreams they have for their children. The parents and grandparents who had come to this meeting, and it was a series of meetings, and I encouraged them to go home and talk to their kids. What are their dreams? What are the dreams they share? And at this session, a grandmother stood up and started speaking passionately in her mother tongue, Xhosa, and I didn't know what she was saying, and my interpreter was going to be very respectful and not say anything. And so I just kind of took a deep breath and stood there, and I didn't know whether she was saying, "Who are you? What are you doing here? Why are you wasting our time?" And she finally said, the translator said to me, "Mrs. Nyati would like to say that on behalf of all the parents and grandparents here, we want to thank you, because we all have hopes and dreams for our children, and no one has ever asked us." That was a very profound moment for me, because the teachers in the school are wonderful. Many of them come from the community. The principal was a great leader, grew up in this township. But they somehow felt these parents who were illiterate, who were poor, had nothing of value they could share to improve the children's education. And how often does that happen? Where if you're not of the right social class, then you're deemed to have no wisdom whatsoever. Then you're just to be written off. Because I'm here ordering dinner and you're just pouring water into my glass. I can pretend you don't even exist. Who's cleaning up after us? Who's emptying the waste baskets that we haven't bothered to find out what that person's life is, what his or her life experiences are that could be shared? There are so many opportunities for growth and for learning if we just take a moment and say, every opportunity we have, every interaction we have with another human being is an opportunity to learn something. There is untapped wisdom there. Whether they are poor or illiterate or too old or too young or too foreign or from the wrong side of the neighborhood, if we get out of all of that, then we are open to learning at every possible opportunity.
Okay, I want to kind of take the conversation a little deeper, as we had talked earlier, and you touched on a few of these things, and as you just summed up. But in reading, especially your chapter in the book and the introduction, and this is something I've been personally thinking about for some time, is, you know, how do you get the buy-in? You know, so how do we sell this idea of diversity and the importance of diversity and multiculturalism? You know, many may ask, why is this important for me? And you know, maybe speaking from the majority group, how is this going to benefit me in society? What's in it for us? You'll hear, and so. I think that this is the case for, you know, for our kids and teaching our kids about diversity and multiculturalism and getting that buy-in out there straight away at the beginning, but also, as you said, in the workplace, in our daily lives, our routines, and in even a broader sense, in a broader picture, our government and government policies, such as immigration. I think. You know, it's really important. Anyway, I think it's important for all people that we can, you know, all find a place here in this importance of diversity and mutuality and multiculturalism in that culture. And it's a perfect place we live in the United States for this, and we all can benefit from it, whether we are the majority or the minority. And so. Just to go dig a little deeper, I have a few questions. Why should we care about diversity, multiculturalism, pluralism? How do we get to that point of caring? Okay, so why, and then how, and then, of course, even deeper, how does this then deepen, enhance who we are as individuals, as communities, all of us? So.
I think it's a core question. How do we get people who look different than us to care? Mm-hmm. And, you know, I always say part of it is, here I am, a middle-class white woman. Well, I'm only middle class because my father, who was a self-made man, came up from poverty. And he created an opportunity for me to be middle class. So who would be more interesting to speak to, me or him? But our society has moved away from that, of valuing people who don't necessarily have a lot of money. So how do we get at this idea that diversity benefits every single one of us? Really, if you look around, if your eyes are open, the answers are all around us. And it was the purpose of my first book was to get that message out in terms of schools, debunking the middle class myth, why diverse schools are good for all kids, because it exists today, but not as much as it did when I wrote it about a decade ago. But the idea that diverse schools are good for kids socially. Again, we're getting back to this celebration. It's nice for our kids to go to school with one another and have friends that are different. Oh, but classes? Oh, I just want to make sure they're challenging. And so I've got to make sure my kid is in a school where they'll be challenged. And, you know, diverse school really isn't. Well, it's a very false choice. Diverse schools are the places, if they're well run, if every kid feels valued, if families are engaged, those are the places where kids really do have an opportunity to learn from one another. I wrote this book before I really knew the research. Then I thought, well, I better check the research out to make sure that my personal experiences were validated, and wow, it was right there. The research says that kids who are in diverse classes, meaning they're with peers from different backgrounds, from different races and religions, from different economic groups, they have enriched discussions. And I heard it over and over again from teachers. One teacher said to me, I've got to be at the top of my game every time I come in here. He was a history teacher. He said, there is always somebody in this classroom who knows more than I do about a subject. So I just can't fool around. I got to know what I'm talking about. And it isn't just history. I had a science teacher tell me that there was a dialogue they were having in the classroom about the relationship between science and society. And the kids were discussing it, and they were talking about animal testing and animal rights. And a young man who was relatively new to the school raised his hand and said, "What are animal rights? I thought animals were food." And he had just come from a country on the Horn of Africa that was near starvation. And so if his family was lucky enough to have an animal killed, they ate. And all the other kids just stopped. And they thought, well, gee, I just opened the refrigerator door. Half of them have probably never even been to a supermarket. They didn't necessarily change their minds about animal rights. That's not what this is about. This is not about convincing someone your opinion is right. It is about getting individuals to think, to be open-minded, to understand different perspectives. And when you have students of all different backgrounds in a classroom presenting different perspectives, challenging each other, that's when the real education begins. It goes outside the book. It goes beyond what the teacher can provide. And it's not just in the friendships, it is in the academic subjects where this enrichment goes on. And this was going on in schools for at least a decade, because that's where diversity first hit. That's where they're looking at the demographics of our changing country in the younger grades. And now it's just starting to hit the businesses. And I'm so excited. I kept saying, when this generation gets out and starts running the world, we're going to be in better shape. By that point, they didn't have a name for the millennials, but now I know that's what this group is being called. They are interesting, broad thinkers. So they're going out into the work world, and places that embrace them and others who are different, that value this diversity, are reporting. They see increased productivity. They see increased creativity. They see collaborative groups being effective. The same things we saw in the diverse schools that are well run. There was a terrific article with the leaders of L'Oreal, the cosmetic company that's based in Canada, and they credit their commitment to diversity with their success, their increased productivity, their increased innovation. There's this terrific quote from the director of marketing that says that we have these diverse teams that debate the issues, and it pushes us to be more innovative, to be more creative. And I love the word debate, because that says they really get it. It's not putting people on a team with the leadership saying, well, here's our goal, and let's think within the confines of how we've always operated. It's saying, let's create a diverse team and give it all you got. Let's really debate, let's dialogue, let's discuss, and let's push towards innovation. And that's precisely what L'Oreal said. And that's what we're seeing. That's how you get the buy-in. Because it's in the schools, it's in our communities. There's some people from community organizations here. When a community really gets to understand one another, when there are opportunities for people to interact with each other, and you and I have talked about this, in authentic ways. Mm-hmm. Not just the international dinners, but in ways where there is a dialogue where you can say what you really think, and the other person will respect that. that's the way we start growing in our communities.
I mean, we know that at the Rumi Forum. I mean, with interfaith and intercultural dialogue and the dialogues that we've conducted, it's an exchange of information. And so communities come together and they discuss a topic and perspectives on that topic, and then they sit down for a dialogue, typically over a meal. And, you know, as someone who's been doing this now for 7.5 years, you know, it's only, you know, and I've seen it and I've heard this from other testimonials, that it just expands one's own path. So it broadens one's path that they're already on. It doesn't, you know, take away, but it adds to. And so it's not a lose situation. Actually, it's a win-win situation. And so that mutual exchange, that's why I like to say mutual, because it's a mutual exchange of information. Both parties are benefiting. And it's really, as you say, it's only going to enhance who we are as individuals and as communities. There is no doubt about it. So.
And I think this idea that you're not going to be less committed to your principles, you're going to change in a negative way, that's not what you get out of dialogue. You grow.
No,
you become more open, and sometimes your own beliefs strengthen.
Exactly.
When
Yes.
My kids were in this extremely diverse high school, a lot of the people from different religions were saying their children went back and they were studying their religion because they wanted to participate in discussions and know what they were talking about.
Exactly.
So
Yeah,
it forces you to dig deeper about who you really are, so that you can participate. And as we both know, if you participate in a dialogue and you join the dialogue to change someone, to convince the other person that you're right,
Completely missed the point.
miss the point, and
Maybe
it's bound to
yeah.
fail.
It is absolutely bound to fail. I mean, that's, yeah, absolutely, because you'll hit a block.
Right.
I mean, it'll literally, I think.
And it's no longer dialogue.
No, it isn't. It's telling somebody else what to think and what to believe and what I believe is best. And you know, so it's not embracing that mutuality. It's
Right.
not, you know, that diversity. You mentioned, I don't know if this would be a good time to talk about this, but if possible, there is a project or a program called Where I'm From, and that they do it, and that you have conducted and actually have a great story to tell about. So can you please do that?
Yeah, I do a lot of work with diverse schools, with diverse organizations, businesses, nonprofits, and communities, and I'm trying to help people do this introspection, which again can be challenging, can be a little painful, but if you don't start with looking at who you are, then you don't really know the prism that you're looking through to judge or evaluate what others are doing. And an exercise that I have found that I love doing, and I've done it with adults, I've done it with students, is called Where I'm From. It's created by an educator named Linda Christensen, and she bases it on a poem by George Ella Lyon. And the poem is Where I'm From, and it's snippets of what you heard when you were home, what you saw, the things you did as a child, in just little phrases. And I read that, and then I work with the group to write their own poem. Just for a couple minutes, maybe 15, 20 minutes, they write some of the things they heard from home. And it's very powerful that they start seeing what it is what were they grounded in? What is the foundation that they now use that colors the way they view the world? And sometimes you hear people from very diverse backgrounds with the same phrases. You know, I've heard people use the phrase, you know, my dad said to me, you just keep trying harder. Or the importance of grandparents in the family. And one time I was working with a faculty, and there were two faculty members who had very similar stories, and they both realized that they were from New Orleans. It was about a year after Katrina. One was African American and one was white. And so there were parts of their stories that were different, and there were parts that were very familiar. And as soon as we had a break, they were on this faculty, they didn't even know they were both from New Orleans. And they just immediately found each other and became very fast friends after that, because it does build this relationship. It gives you an opportunity to say what's important. And there have been immigrants in some of my groups where they talk about some of the things they heard as a child from others that made them uncomfortable. It was a very powerful session with an immigrant on a faculty where everybody loved her. She's a wonderful person. No one had ever really had a real, authentic conversation with her about what her life had been. And once we were in an environment where that was provided to her, she revealed things about herself that were very enlightening to the rest of the faculty, and enlightening to them in the way that they now could relate to the immigrant children who were in their classes. So it's a way to get to know each other. It's a way to get to know yourself. The goal is not to put somebody in the middle of the room and say, well, you're biased. You realize that, you're prejudiced that way. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about understanding who you are and how does that impact the way you see the world. And the goal is, once you get that deep understanding, to sometimes say, well, maybe that's not the only right way to do something. We talk about somebody don't stand too close. What is too close? Who knows what too close is in your book? Or teachers will say, well, that parent was really loud when she came in. Well, maybe that parent was so emotionally engaged in what was going on in the classroom that was the only way that she was able to communicate. And to her, that wasn't that loud. I remember my daughter's friends saying to her, why were you and your mother arguing? And my daughter saying, we weren't arguing. We just talk loud. So it's that understanding that your way is not the only right way, that there are lots of right ways, and to be open to that. For me, as a person that does this work, one of the things that I've had to do is let people finish sentences. For some, that wouldn't be a big challenge. For me, it is. And so, we all have to see what we bring into the room and be open to new ways of communicating, of doing things, and understand that that's the way we can grow.
I think it's also a very good way for people to value them, good exercise to value themselves, to think that they have something, they have a culture, especially for those of us that, yes, as you stated earlier, it's the Lebanese or the Indian or the Korean, or, that they have culture. Hispanic family has culture. But we don't have culture. And as a white Anglo-Saxon woman, I can definitely identify with that. And the first time anyone asked me to talk about my culture and actually said, no, you do have a culture, was in, university. I was in my mid-20s. And that was, but to me, until that point, everything about culture or diversity was about someone of color or came from a different country, or I didn't have a culture. That wasn't something.
And let me just say that we also talk about individuals as being diverse.
Yes, exactly. And I think that exactly is what I believe that exercise,
right.
Or a good part of that exercise is a benefit for. You brought up in the beginning media, and I want to Sarah Kugler, Eileen's daughter, wrote a chapter in the book as well. She is an educator as well in Fairfax County, I believe. Mm-hmm. She says, teaching the silenced curriculum is also about helping kids develop a critical lens for messages, whether from the media or from other people in their life, about identity. We want students to be able to read their world in such a way that they can identify, dismantle, talk about, and reconstruct these messages. So can you talk a bit about what silenced curriculum is?
Sure. And just to explain that the book is 17 chapters from
Right.
educators all over the world.
Exactly.
Who are talking about what they're doing to engage diverse families in classrooms.
Yep.
And Sarah did this work when she was in New York City. She was in a class. She was a second grade teacher in a very diverse school, and what she and the other teachers there were finding was that kids were having experiences on the playground or before school about things that were very important, and then would say something to the teacher, and typically the teacher would say, oh, well, we're not dealing with that. For example, a kid would be teased for being overweight a little bit, for wearing a headscarf in the older grades, for maybe being a little effeminate as a boy. And typically teachers say, talk to your parents about that. We're not going to talk about it. Or they say, oh, well, I'll talk to that child, and we won't, we don't accept any kind of behavior like that. But they don't get at the root of it. And a lot of the teachers were feeling the need to have what they called the silenced curriculum brought into the classroom. So what they did in a very academic way was to help the students look at where these messages were coming from. Who says what the appropriate weight is? Who dictates that? Where does that message come from? And some of the kids talked about, well, a parent or a grandparent or television or a book or an older kid. And they went through a lot of different dialogues about that, and then gave the students the opportunity to look at media, to critically look at where these messages were coming from in the written world, and then to recreate them, to create their own messages about identity. And it was a very, very powerful experience for the students, and she goes into exactly how they did that, and she has some of the dialogues the students have. But what I love about that is that it took, as she said, a silenced curriculum, something that had been treated as, well, we can't do that because we've got math and science right now, and moved it into the curriculum where it became the topic they used to develop critical thinking skills, which is so important.
Okay, I think it's time to have a dialogue with
Sure.
the audience. So, we'll take our first question. So I'm sorry, can you just wait for the mic?
Okay.
Yep, there you go. Can you state your name, please?
Oh, yes, my name is,
Tom?
it's on, it's green.
Yep.
Hello, Misty? Doesn't
Yes.
sound like it. Anyway.
Yeah.
That's okay, they're recording and it is on.
Okay. Yes, my name is Laura Lacoon. I'm just a private individual, not affiliated with an organization. Yes, I was curious as to about how you got involved with this volunteer opportunity in South Africa. Had someone before you started it, or did you start it, or could you just tell us more about that? That just sounds fascinating.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to talk about it because it's such a piece of my heart. Clearly, I work with people from all over the world here in the United States, but felt the desire to go to another part of the world and learn more. And my husband is an educator and an administrator, and he and I went on a multicultural trip to, first of all, we went to China. We visited schools. We had a very interesting time. We knew the person leading it, who is a Chinese-American educator. And then the group that we were with had such a good time. We said, well, where should we go next? And we said, oh, well, let's go to South Africa. And I tell you this because I want you to know how random it was that we ended up in South Africa. It was, well, that should be interesting. So we went on this tour. It was 2004. I had no idea the power of being in a new democracy. It was just a little more than a decade old. And I remember the John Adams series was on HBO at the time, and I thought, this is what it felt like to be there, as they are saying there are opportunities now for us that just did not exist. And we visited schools, and the teachers were so incredibly committed to helping their children take their place in the new democracy and have opportunities that they didn't have. And there was this tremendous optimism. And at the same time, there were so many challenges in every aspect of creating equality and equity in a society that it was so unequal for so long. And education was right in there with it. And part of it is, and I didn't realize this, was that during apartheid, when there was an embargo of information. They didn't get research. They didn't get new tools. They were years behind in even how to train educators. And my husband does a lot of teacher training, and I said, I think we need to go back. I will work with you. I'll work with the families. I'll do community building, but I really think we need to go back to South Africa. And I found an international organization called People and Places, Responsible Volunteering. Anybody who ever wants to volunteer somewhere somewhere around the world, this is a great place. They're based in the UK. They match individuals with countries and a need. So we went with our educator daughter, and we went for 3 weeks in the summer of 2008. And honestly, I thought, well, we'll go here this year and then we'll figure out what we're going to do. No, we fell in love with the place. We fell in love with the people, the incredible energy there. There's a lot more that I talk about on a blog that we kept in terms of the welcoming that we got, the things we have learned. People say, well, this is so wonderful of you to go. No, we grow every time we go. We learn every time we go. We have developed relationships with these individuals, and we feel like in some way we're helping. And it's a very powerful thing.
Oh, that's wonderful. What is the blog?
It's called Kuglers in South Africa.
Okay.
.blogspot.com. If you just put Kuglers in South Africa in Google, you'll find it.
Okay, thank
And it's been a total honor to be able to do this and to go back. We've been back for 5 years.
Thank you very much.
Is there a question back there?
Hi, my name is Valentine Wilbur, private individual. I went to South Africa in 2003 and also Lesotho, and I've kept up with a lot. I'm not terribly optimistic about South Africa in terms of advancement, in terms of HIV, AIDS. Tell me why you are. I'm not saying.
I think that, it's a great question. Why do you think it's why are you optimistic? Because
Yeah, I feel less so.
there's
as the
so
years
much
go
going
by.
on there, and again, apartheid was so extreme that to take a country, and they're facing the same economic challenges the rest of the world is, if not more so. So to say, well, we're going to improve in all these areas. Our family has taken a very measured approach, and our approach is we are going to work and do what we can to help one school and be involved intently in the people of this one community. And are there still things that need to be done there? Absolutely. Will we ever be able to achieve what we'd like to achieve there? No, but it's different than it was when we first visited there. There are things that are changing. There are students that are changing with tremendous support from so many people who donated books and helped us organize them and donated money to ship them there. And we were able to create a library in a community that had no books. And we were able to just raise money to provide a part-time librarian there who is going to open it to the community. This is extraordinary. As a volunteer who was in our house helping us with we had a whole process of organizing these books and labeling them. We didn't want to just box them up and ship them. We've seen too much of that. You need to have an infrastructure. You need to know how these are going to be organized. You need to ship them to people who are going to know what to do with them when they're there. And that we were very committed to that. There was a woman sitting in our living room helping do that, and she said, I can't tell you what this means to me. I volunteered as a lawyer in South Africa during apartheid, and I was watching people be beaten and sometimes killed over reading books like this. And you are shipping 23,000 books to be read by people who are not permitted to read this? She said, I cannot tell you how powerful this is for me. So that's what keeps us going. It's a focus. It's the relationships, as all my work keeps talking about, it's all about your relationships. It's the relationships we have with the teachers, with the families, with the students. We lived in the township with the people that we lived with who are like extended family to us. So that's the meaning of it. You know, will everything be changed? You know? Will the United States be a great country? I don't, you know, it's like all you do is you do what you can. And I think that's what we need to do, is stay focused and do what you can. And that is the lesson they've taught me. Because if I get depressed, how dare I think they should go on with their life? You know, talk about ways that I've grown is, I'll tell you a quick story. Is that the second year we were there, after we helped them get a computer lab, we thought, great, we're going to get there, they're going to be connected to the internet. And we were all enthusiastic, and we get there, and the phone lines to the township, it's a rural area, the phone lines had been cut. Somebody stole the copper. They hadn't had telephone lines for months. And then the phone company rebuilt it, and then they didn't have phone lines again. And if somebody had a cell phone and had enough money to put some time on it, well, maybe they had communication. But there was, you know, the school, the principal had 2 different phone lines, 2 different cell phones. He was paying for himself. Am I going to walk in there and say, you know, you promised me you were going to have internet? No, I'm going to say, how amazing that you continue to do this every day, knowing there's no phone and no communication. And when there was no water this year for a day, they don't send the kids home. People from the community who had some water came and brought it. And we just did what we needed to do. Those are the lessons that I learned from them.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, Abraham.
Thank you for your interesting and thoughtful presentation. I'm not going to leave you alone on South Africa. South African question. First of all, actually 2 questions. To what extent did you interact with the Jewish community in South Africa? It's quite a strong and powerful community. Most of them came from Lithuania during the reign of Jan Smat, who was a liberal ruler of that country after the First World War. 150,000 people, and they got spared of the escaped Europe, and they were not affected by the Holocaust like all the other Lithuanian Jews. So obviously that was great. They're also a great supporter of Israel. They send their children to serve in the Israeli armed forces, and they speak Hebrew, and so on and so on. They're the strongest Zionist community, Jewish community in the world. So they also, many of them fought against apartheid, and they were in the forefront of the opposition to the regime and so on. So I'm sure you had some potentially powerful ally in the Jewish community.
We did, on our very first trip, we were in Cape Town for part of that trip.
Yeah, they're mostly in the Cape Province.
Yeah, and we did go to a synagogue. We're Jewish, so we did go to a synagogue, and we did try to connect with people there. And they were very active in the anti-apartheid movement. In the 90s, many of the Jews moved out, and I think partly because they had just gone through the Holocaust, and they were, you know, they didn't have the deep roots, as someone explained to me. In the area where we go now, which is Port Elizabeth, there's a very small, shrinking population. So, you know, that we did make a connection, but it hasn't been as strong as you know, it might be. But it's a multicultural country, and particularly when we're in the city, when we're not in the rural area, we tend to go to Port Elizabeth on the weekends, and we do make connections with a very broad group of individuals. So I know there was a question.
Yeah, my second question relates to helping individuals, especially children that you meeting and assisting to realize their potential in life. There's obviously, you mentioned diversity, the symphony of people and voices from all over the country and with different views and background and so on, but as Napoleon Bonaparte used to say, the ability without opportunity means nothing. You know, there are a lot of capable people. If they then get the opportunity to realize their potential, then it means nothing. So the question is, once they are equipped with their communication skills and dialogues and understanding each other and so on, how do they prepare themselves for life in terms of taking advantage of opportunities or creating ones for themselves? I mean, or maybe they're still left behind.
I think it's a very challenging time in South Africa, and I'm not a South African politician or a historian, so I don't pretend to know more than I gain when I'm there. I think that, for example, the interest in teaching English, which is required around the country, it's the language of commerce. And they don't want these students to be isolated in that way. I tend to read the newspaper from that area, even when we're not there, and I was just reading that in the Eastern Cape, where there's a real unemployment crisis. And so the opportunities are very limited, and we do see a lot of very bright high school graduates who don't have much opportunity beyond that. So,
And
yeah,
there's also-
I know there's a question in the back too.
There's also high crime rates in South Africa, right?
So do we have a question in the back? And then we'll take that, and then I believe we'll be wrapping up.
I have two quick questions, and they're same but different. So,
Okay.
one, I used to be an elementary school teacher, and I had studied, my undergraduate work was in multicultural education, and I had the interaction with students that would look down in a respectful way, and even though I knew what they were doing, it annoyed me so much. So the question is, even though I'm consciously there and aware of what's happening, any suggestions on how to bridge the gap in order to try and interact in a better way? And then the second question is, I was involved with the UN Rwanda Tribunal, so I was working with a lot of people from different countries. And a lot of times people would have a different way of saying no, which was much more subtle than the American way. And I would sometimes figure it out. Sometimes in one case I called the next day and said, I'm sorry, I realized you said no and I didn't hear it. But in this situation where you're not picking up on it, any suggestions on how to pick up on things faster?
Yeah, they're good questions, and the issue is if you know why the child is doing it but it's still bothering you. I actually think you raise a very good point, which is even if we understand why a child is doing something that in the American culture is not accepted, it doesn't mean you shouldn't say something. I mean, to not get angry at the child, but to say, some people are going to think you're being disrespectful if you don't look up. So you may want to look at me when I'm talking. I mean, I think that's the difference between saying, you look at me when I'm talking, versus, I don't want you to be misunderstood, and really mean it, that you want that, you want to help the children grow. I think it's really important. And in terms of culturally not knowing things, boy, I mean, when you're in another country, you are outside your comfort zone. And I try to find people I can trust. And I do feel that there were people that we could be very honest with, that we asked a lot of really honest questions. If you don't have anybody you can ask an honest question of, then it's very challenging. But and the way you find people you can trust is to be trustworthy. I mean, we didn't go in there to make the world a better place. We were not the Americans who were going to solve your problems. We were here to offer whatever strengths and whatever skills we had, and here to learn from you. And in my mind, I feel that's what made this work, is that we honestly believed we were there to learn as much as we were there to teach, and that's what keeps us going back. Because there's lots of other places we could go, but what we've learned is what keeps us going.
Oh, and on that note, I think we will come to a close. All right, thanks so much, Eileen. Please give Eileen Gale Ku a round of applause.